Thank you for joining us today for this webcast presented by ACG Pittsburgh, Developing and Managing Corporate Culture with a Remote Workforce. I'm Ron Herring, retired Senior Vice President of MSA Safety and President of MSA International, and I'm on the ACG Pittsburgh Board of Directors. Today, I will serve as your moderator for this program. It's been a little over 1 year since our personal and work lives were disrupted by the COVID-19 virus. Where working remotely was once a unique situation reserved for salespeople, consultants, writers, and such, it is now the norm in many, if not most, workplaces. As leaders in business, what does this mean when it comes to developing and managing a healthy corporate culture? Our intent today is to provide some insight as to what other companies are doing and what are the leading edge processes and tools that might help in recruiting, retaining, and investing in our workforce to assure that our corporate cultures continue to thrive. First, I'd like to thank our ACG Pittsburgh annual sponsors. We would not be able to bring you great programming without their continued support. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, please let me know or reach out to Micah Whitfield. Complimentary virtual program access to regular events is a newer benefit of annual sponsorship, and there's also free ACG Pittsburgh membership for an individual under the age of 40. Moving on to today's event, our webcast features panelist Dr. Alfred or Al Schnur, President of the People Company International Human Resource Consulting, Lora Dikun, recently retired Chief Administration Officer for Giant Eagle, and Steve Blanco, President of MSA Americas. Al, why don't we start with you? Can you provide a brief background of yourself?
Thanks, Ron, and welcome everybody. Thanks so much for having us today, or having me today. My name is Al Schnur. I'm the president of PCI, and PCI has been providing assessment and development executive coaching since 1957. I am not a founder, but have owned the company since 2001, and proud to continue our long tradition. Have 30 plus years work in organizational surveys, organizational culture, and have spent the last 30 plus years also on assessment and development for startups, expansions, mergers and acquisitions, and executive coaching and development for high potential programs, succession planning. And currently I'm very focused on executive coaching for remote managers and also promoting inclusivity around diverse populations, as well as doing a lot of work with early career and college students around career planning. So thank you again for having me.
Thanks, Al. I think Al's probably assessed me more than my own wife has. So, so Lora, can you provide some background on your career as well?
Absolutely, and thank you for inviting me to participate today. My background is pretty broad, starting in accounting, tax, and finance, and then heading over into the human resources space. Most recently, I served as the Chief Administrative Officer and Chief People Officer for Giant Eagle, although I've recently retired. That responsibility included not only all the people-related aspects, but also risk, legal, and safety areas for the organization. And excited to be here today to talk about culture.
Thank you, Lora. And last but not least, Steve, can you give us some of your background?
Thanks, Ron. Absolutely. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steve Blanco. I'm the president of MSA Americas, and many of you in the Pittsburgh region know MSA, but if you don't, we're a company that's been around since 1914, and we're a safety company. So we are a global leader in the sophisticated safety product manufacture, design, and delivery. So this has been obviously an interesting year for us. I'm sure we'll talk more about it. My background also is varied. I started out in the automotive industry, spent some time there, and a lot of time in manufacturing and design, some in finance. And then in the last 8 years, I've been in the business side. So I ran our US and Canada business as a general manager, and since 2017, have led the Americas. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone. Actually, it's great to have such a deep yet varied experience on this panel. Now, if the audience has any questions for our presenters during this event, please use the Zoom Q&A function. The presenters will then do their best to respond to all of your questions during or even at the end of the discussion. So why don't we get started here? A couple of questions here. I'll start with Steve, I think. What have your organizations done to invest in and build your corporate culture during the pandemic and the associated move to remote workforces?
Yeah, sure, Ron. And I think, and it's probably not unique to us, we all have felt this. When this started, there was a lot of anxiety and really the fear of the unknown. So one of the things we try to do is how do we lean in on our culture? As I said, we're a safety company, so we had the advantage of being able to lean on our mission, which is that men and women may work in safety in part. That's really what we're about. And given the pandemic, that made that even more important and more clearly pronounced. But what we wanted to do, because of that anxiety and the unknown, is really make sure that we stay connected to the workforce. And like many of you, and I know, Laura, we've talked about this, we have workers that are essential and have continued to work and come to work every day. And then we've had a number, obviously, that have gone remote and been off-site for the protection of them as well as for the essential workers. So we spent a lot of time really working on processes and practices to ensure that we had a transparent way of A, communicating, B, ensuring their safety, and in really working on a connectivity process. So how we did that was we leaned in on a few processes that we've done before and some that were new. And the processes that we really leaned in on is leadership communication. So for example, for me, I did town halls and continue to do those town halls on a very frequent basis, where prior to the pandemic, I would do a quarterly town hall. Now it became something we do monthly or every 2 months. And it started out in March, and the first one we did was all Q&A. It was really about, here's our mission, here's why we're here. And we opened it up to our audience. So we had like 200 questions. It was a week into the pandemic. And we just try to be very transparent and provide some real honest and open dialogue, as well as respond as quickly as possible. The other thing I think is important for us is we tried to do our best, and not every organization could do this, but we had no furloughs and we had no wage reductions. And we thought that was important if we could maintain that because of the work and the focus that the associates had done and continue to do throughout the pandemic. So leadership engagement, transparent communication, and really to us were critical to our success.
Oh, thanks, Steve. How about Laura? Same type of question here. What did your organization do to invest and build your corporate culture during the pandemic, during the start?
Yeah. So first, given that Giant Eagle's an essential business, we had to make sure that we were continuing to operate. Interestingly enough, I was just having a conversation a couple of weeks ago saying, we were preparing for the possibility of having to work remote, and had actually started a test where we phased in our corporate teams to work from home. It was a third until we got to over 3 days. We'd get to 100%, and then we just never came back. Right, so it was sort of, the timing was just in the right place. And I really like some of what Steve just shared, because it really rings true for Giant Eagle as well. And that is, there's a very strong, teamwork and safety culture within Giant Eagle. And those were things that this provided an opportunity for us to lean into those. Our stores were operating, as many of you, I'm sure, experienced personally. And it became all hands on deck. Anyone who was in a corporate role actually went out into the stores to be there to not only to help our customers, but show the support for our team members who were pretty nervous, as nobody knew anything at the time other than they were really scared about what might be coming. And that really gave us an opportunity to play into that teamwork, and we're here for each other. There's also, communications was key, right? And so when we had, we were operating 24/7 in over 400 locations, And so making sure that we can get to not only our corporate team, our retail team, our distribution centers as well. And we had a lot of work on the communications front to really drive that home, being either virtual meetings or videos that we would send out, sending talking points for leaders in those areas that had to maintain, like in the distribution centers, you have to continue to come in and fill those orders to get them to the stores, to really give them as much information as possible to make them feel more comfortable, and that we're still all here for each other. I would say that well, communications is always something we're going to have to continue to work on, but this was a great place for us to really focus in on how to do that best if we can't pull everyone together in the same location.
I have to say that one of the first experiences I had, when this all broke out and you had to go to Giant Eagle the first time, just the help, the service orientation of the Giant Eagle employee was just incredible. Mm-hmm. And it was at the time, and so you could see that the results of the work that you did there really was quite magnificent.
If I could just add to that, I would call out to our customers. The customers were amazing, and how I know there's a lot of people who were, filling their shopping cart with whatever they could find. But personally, I witnessed customers thanking the cashiers and their stock clerks to really for showing up, right, and being there when the community needed them. And so that actually helped a lot as well.
Now, you both have blended workforces, both, so you had some staying at home and some that had to go to work. How did that create opportunities or challenges in this whole experience, particularly as it is how you're communicating the mission and values of the organization?
All right, I'll respond first. I would say that communications, again, making sure that we're communicating to the right groups, right? When there's a broadcast that says everyone has to work from home, well, you have to really sort through and say that's not really practical. Maybe 80% could work from home, but there are areas of the organization that had to continue to come in to support our stores, from an IT infrastructure, to things like making sure that payroll still happens, and because that would be not good, and accounts payable and receivable. There's still a lot of stuff that comes through the mail, and so we had to set up ways for them to come in and go through that periodically. So to say across the board everyone can work from home it's just not practical. And helping people understand how that works was a key opportunity for us. And then there was also if you can, we wanted you to be in the stores. So even if you work from home most of the time, we tried to find, shifts where people could go in and help the stores when they needed it the most, because it was really hard to keep up with the demand, especially in the beginning.
Yeah, there's some things Lora said, I think, that line up, and some that are different based on the business model that Lora had to deal with, Ron. One of the things I thought was interesting is when we went remote for the professional staff, the number of professional associates that wanted to still work in the office was really pretty high. And I think part of that was that relationship and trying to keep that culture going. Of course, we were all trying to navigate this virtual world that we've learned much better how to do now, but that was a challenge. And I think the other piece was certainly we had associates that were required to come in as we continue to make safety products that were, anxious. So we spent a lot of time and effort ensuring that both understood their roles and the importance and impact their roles had. We put some kits together on how to stay safe. Obviously, we've spent, as many did, a lot of work around safety equipment. We actually went through a couple gyrations to make sure they got the most comfortable masks that we could find. We provided a set of washable masks as well, so that they had something they could continue to use, and some other PPE as well. And those challenges, I think helped a lot. I also think if there is a little silver lining here is some of the administrative folks that maybe didn't appreciate operations as much and didn't understand the impact that they have in this world and on the business. They've come to a realization of just how valuable our operations associates are and how key what they do is to the organization.
Steve, one of the things that's unique for you is you actually lead a global multilingual organization, with both North America and Latin America. Now, how has that created challenges in communicating the mission, vision, and values of the organization and reinforcing that?
Well, as you know, Ron, it's super important when you have a global organization typically to engage in the region for the associates so you can ensure that you're providing the development and coaching and leadership and supporting that customer base, which is critically important. So it's been unique. It's been certainly interesting to try to do that. I think what really has been refreshing is the amount of technology that we've been able to leverage. So the virtual world and the customer, the buying behaviors of the customer base have evolved really in a year, 5+ years. And we've seen a significant change as they've moved to the e-commerce platform. They were moving that way anyway, as many of us are. But we've seen that in a number of different categories. One thing that I think was really unique for us is the way we tried to engage customers without going to see them. So the teams did some really unique events and webinars and training activities, and the results were really, really strong. We've had tens of thousands of customers and potential customers participate in these events that we thought we might have hundreds to start with. But I think they were in the same boat we were. They weren't going anywhere, so they wanted to engage in different ways, which really helped drive that participation. That plus, these Zoom and Teams have really improved our ability to communicate, and we're using those to the fullest. I think the travel will be one. There'll be some travel coming back, but I suspect as we go forward, we've recognized the ability to manage a lot of what we've done differently, and some of that travel won't come back.
Now, Al, what are some of the best practices that you've seen or created over during this whole event?
Well, I think that Steve and Lora covered a lot of those. I tend to sort of take a step back, obviously being a consultant. So I will share my screen, a couple of quick slides, and kind of walk through the model of what I see would be best practices. That's okay. That should work. And okay. I think the key is to make sure you are clearly defining your mission, vision, and core values in order to essentially define the culture that you want to have as an organization. And this may have changed. It's hard enough to create and develop a culture, even in normal circumstances. It's also very hard to manage remotely. Try to do those two things simultaneously, it becomes even more challenging. So in this situation, you'll want to make sure that you understand the differences, but if you do have a remote and a traditional workforce, see how these things are viewed, and really clearly define, redefine, and make sure that it's very simple, very doable. And then once you have that, you'll want to communicate it very clearly. And then at this point, it may make sense to do some surveys and look, are there differences between geographies? Are there differences between remote workers and on-site workers, that type of thing? And are we incorporating inclusivity and diversity as we absolutely have to? Now, once you have defined the strategy clearly, gathered the data, looked at all of your systems from selection, onboarding, performance management, internal events, online events, that type of thing, then you will want to assess those people who are coming into the organization in terms of their ability to work and most importantly, to lead remotely. What we find is that in an unstructured situation, people are more, personality traits and derailers are much more likely to be exhibited, to come out. In a work situation, there's less degrees of freedom, there's more constraints, that type of thing. So it's very, very important. And I'd like to just click down on this in terms of what some of the things we see as absolutely need to have a handle on in terms of a person's task focus. Next to cognitive ability, the strongest predictor of success across most jobs is going to be conscientiousness, task focus. Are you going to work hard when no one's looking? And then team focus. Are you going to proactively communicate? Are you going to collaborate? Are you going to reach out? Because it's very easy for people to get lost, and also for leaders to lose people if they are not naturally engaged. And also adaptability. I think in the last two speakers talked through a whole bunch of different things in terms of technology, different ways of managing. Everything is different. We all have learned, I think we all have done video calls before, but in terms of how to effectively use Zoom, how to change our backgrounds, how to share a screen, different things like that. And that will continue. So people that are curious, adaptable, and want to change, and then hire leaders that are going to provide the two most important aspects of leadership, which is structure and direction, and then showing consideration and support. And leaders that are less engaged definitely are going to need to have coaching, development, all of those sorts of things to make sure, and all this can be delivered remotely, to make sure that they are exhibiting those things that are going to support your desired culture. And again, I can't say it strongly enough that people who are low on these things are less likely to display organizational citizenship behaviors that support your culture, much more likely to display counterproductive work behaviors that are destructive to the culture, those derailers, and in turn will be less likely to motivate teams, manage performance, and model and reinforce the culture. And one thing I should have said up front is that if you do all of these things right, it's going to lead to engaged people, high-performing teams, innovative strategies, profitable growth, in other words, bottom line results. The two other parts of this are you're going to have less turnover, which has a cost, all sorts of cost, as well as be seen as a much more attractive place to work, best place to work, avoid the negative Glassdoor ratings, that sort of thing. So in terms of a best practice, once you make sure that you've defined your culture, communicated it clearly, assess the difference between remote and on-site workers, assess and develop people around the behaviors that you want to exhibit, then foster that. So tie rewards into exhibiting those behaviors, supporting the culture, and that in turn will lead to more growth in terms of people's abilities and ability to manage remotely.
So Al, I mean, this is a lot of this is on the front end. How do we know if individual leaders or team members working remotely are living our values?
I think that's where survey work comes in. And one of the most important tool, in addition to broadly getting an organizational survey tool, it doesn't have to be a formal survey with the feedback and the layers. It could be something as simple as a SurveyMonkey survey asking about, my leader is this, exhibits this. But I think more importantly, at the individual level, especially if you're going to be doing coaching, is to do 360-degree feedback where you're getting the leader's self-perception, you're getting how they're seen by peers, customers, and most importantly, their employees, as well as looking at those key traits that I mentioned in the previous slide, that these are things that are best gotten at through a psychometric psychological assessment, because these are the way people are hardwired in these ways. And for example, in an interview, somebody may tell you they can do all these things, but again, we're looking at what are they going to do when no one's looking. And for better or for worse, moving forward, there's going to be a lot of times when no one's looking with a remote workforce.
So, what do we do to identify, actually, if a leader is not following, is not, living the values, what is your recommendation to, what are the recommended actions then?
The recommended action is to, first of all, assess and make sure that we understand why, both in terms of psychometric and 360 assessment, give that individual feedback, give the leader an opportunity to create a development plan with some targeted tasks and completion dates to move forward. But once either the person is unwilling or unable to do those things, then it becomes a different type of discussion in terms of if it's unwilling, then it's a performance management issue. If it's unable, then it may be this team is too broad, or maybe there's an individual contributor role. But again, it's a leader that is not living your values is doubly or exponentially more damaging to your culture and your organization when you're looking at a remote workforce.
So I guess one of the tough questions these days is, so many organizations have pivoted and gone to the remote workforce. How do you define a transition plan to return to something different than where we're at today? Maybe Steve, that would be a good question for you to start off with, or Laura, either one. Someone's muted.
Okay, I'll jump in. Unless Steve, you ready to go?
Sure. Either way is fine. Yeah, it's a really good question, Ron. So we have like 4 phases, and don't tell Ian. I know he's shaking his head back and forth about that mute button. We put together phases of return to work. Certainly there's those essential workers that have to be there anyway. And then we really tried to break it down by the criticality of being on site. So for example, people that are impacted by being remote and it does affect their ability to do their job, they have to cross-functionally work in ways, or they might be doing testing, design testing and such. So those folks we've had those start to come back, and they've transitioned back into the workforce. What we have done, and I think this is important, we put a schedule together to minimize that overlap when there's associates in the same area coming together. So that's worked really well. And that's been, again, a big piece around communication and making sure we have an appropriate schedule with their management teams. The next phases for us are what we consider beneficial workers. So you're going to see, by and large, those that have benefits for being face-to-face, but it's not required. You've seen the success of, the remote work, the virtual activities like we're doing here. And that's been very successful. So we're really not in a rush, quite frankly. We do want to get back because we believe the relationships are critical, and there's going to be some level that we want to ensure that that continues. But that's probably a phase, Ron, that I would assume we get back to when vaccinations are much more broad or widespread or broadly available. Laura, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you. What I would add to that, and how we might be looking at things differently, or Giant Eagle is looking a little bit differently, is remember I said not everybody was ever able to work from home. So they were going in from the very beginning, and we did make sure that there was a limited number of people in the space, and that they had masks and the right kind of cleaning solution, things of that nature. And what we had talked about with our corporate team members is, when we talk about surveys, right? One of the things we said is, what do you need to be able to work from home longer term, right? Because as I mentioned early on, this started as a 3-day test, and then it went on for a year. So, some of the things we got back is, what you would expect, like I need, maybe it's better equipment, but some was, I need a place to go, right? So we talk about, I think, Steve, you mentioned that not everybody wanted to work from home. And we had situations where people were saying, in order for me to concentrate, I need a place to go, and could I please come in, it was sort of this, for, 1 day a week so I can really focus. And so we, worked through that on an individual basis to say, how do you make sure that your team is most productive? And that's part of it. And when we talk about sort of longer term and opening the office is actually open. But what we're saying is, we don't want you shouldn't be having in-person meetings, right? Because that's just you can do things virtually, and that's actually better to do things completely virtually rather than to have some people in person and others participating virtually, because you're not on a level playing field. And that was one of the things that we learned pretty early on, is to the meetings are much better if everyone is on, sort of level, right? You don't have the side conversations happening, things like that. But we did talk about that what you should be going in for if you need the space and how can you schedule it, and that the future of the office was going to never go back to what it was. It was going to be looking very different, and it was going to be more focused on collaboration space when we're actually allowed to physically come together.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, one of the questions that's come from the audience here, both MSA and Giant Eagle have very rich, rich cultures to the organizations. But can anybody describe, and maybe Al, you can jump in on this a little bit, the additional steps or challenges that you might take for companies that are facing this issue with a more transient workforce?
I wanted to build on the idea of people coming back to work, may want to not come back to work, may need to not come back to work. Some people are doing homeschool, have things that keep them around the house. And I think we were talking about this yesterday in another presentation, and I think it really comes back into the idea of engaged leaders that empathize and care about the employees, and then can communicate very effectively. That it may be that either whether it's coming to the office or staying home, I may not want to do that, or I may see somebody else doing what I want to do, and I don't get the choice to do that. So there needs to be a way to communicate, here's what we're going to do, here are the boundaries, and here is why. People don't, and I think that's the thing, even something as simple as we talked about the survey feedback, we want your opinion, doesn't mean we're going to change everything we're doing, but we're going to say, hey, we heard you, we understand, and here's why we're going to move forward, and here's what we may be able to do in the future. So I think it all goes back to engagement. What we find again and again is laissez-faire leadership in managing a remote workforce is an absolute recipe for disaster. I'm not sure if I fully understand the transient workforce, meaning is this people that may work for multiple companies at once, or seasonal, but
yeah, I kind of read it as more turnover. You tend to have perhaps seasonal, but
so
a higher level of turnover.
We actually discussed this idea of people that may work for different companies at once, and there really isn't a selection system. There really isn't a development system. There is, simply if you do good work on time, you get more work, and that is much more challenging. I think it's being clear, if you're going to work for us, whether it's part-time or seasonally, that we still have these expectations. And we didn't talk earlier, but it's really important. Most organizations have a lot of signage around their mission, vision, and values. They're everywhere, in the break rooms, in the restrooms, everywhere. With a remote workforce, how do you keep those messages in front of people? How do you say, this is the expectation? And then, of course, how do you make sure people are meeting the expectation? That's key. That's engaged leadership.
Good. And then we also have a question from the healthcare industry here. So, basically, it says, when allowing employees to work from home while other staff are required to work on site due to roles and responsibilities, how do you manage to keep things fair? The writer here obviously struggles with this quite a bit in healthcare, where many team members are patient facing and others might be able to be more behind the scenes, and they don't have the ability to pay hazard pay, or many of our on-site staff are among the lowest paid. In addition, our work from home staff, if feeling ill, might still work remotely, while our staff on site might have to use their paid time off. What are some of the ways you can just suggest to help keep these situations more fair and equitable and keep morale up? As a leader, I make it a point to be on site and visible. What other suggestions do you have?
That's incredibly challenging and difficult. And I think the first thing, what I said previously, the engaged leadership, communicating, that sort of thing. But I think also finding out what people value and maybe providing things that don't have a monetary cost to the organization, different flexibility, all sorts of things that people could value that would be important.
I know one of the bigger motivators for anybody is not necessarily a monetary motivation. So it comes from a lot of the intangibles that are out there. All right, why don't we move on down, and I got another question here. So let's go to Laura here. Thinking of the bright side, perhaps what are some of the positive learnings that you've had from the last year?
I would say a really positive learning was that leadership suddenly believed that work could be done remotely. So, it's something that, we had been talking about for a long time and trying to figure out how can we provide a more flexible work environment. And so I would say that put a big smile on my face the day I would get calls from a number of the leadership across the organization saying, I never really thought this could work, right? And they were unbelievably productive. And that was, I think, a huge learning that will stay with them for a long time. It also, really gave the leadership, I'll say leadership in particular, more insight into the lives of their team. And you might say, well, if they're a good leader, they should really know their team, but it was in a different way. Like it was, you had a window into what their environment was like, right? Did children come and, jump on their lap in the middle of a meeting, or, dogs barking and, all the things that happen. It really, I think, provided a moment for teams to really lean into that and bond in a better way. So I think for me, that was a huge positive takeaway.
Steve, same question for you.
Yeah, I think Lora hit the nail on the head. Those are some really good points. I've learned a lot about my fellow MSA associates, their children, and the types of dogs, animals, and lives. And it's interesting because at first I think many were embarrassed, and then it became, hey, we're sharing each other. And I think that helps with what Al talked about on the culture side too, because you get that engagement, which went a long way. The other thing I think is interesting is there are certain processes and activities that actually we found are more effective remotely. So I talked about town halls, and we historically would do a town hall in one of our manufacturing sites and pull in people, so we may have a few hundred associates together, and then we'd video it and then send it out for everybody opportunity to view it. Well, now doing this live for everyone to have the opportunity to ask a question live has just really been super effective and appreciated. So those kind of things, I think the opportunity for more immediate and transparent communication instead of something recorded has gone a long way. And the fact that you can do it that way has enabled us already, as I said, and will enable us in the future to continue to do them more frequently. So keeping current on that information at a very critical time period, and for them to hear from leadership, I think has been really good, Ron.
Good. Let me see if we have any other questions here from the audience. I do have another one here. Try to pick out the Al, maybe there's a good question for you. How do you predict who will and will not adapt to remote working, and obviously at the same time live to the vision, mission, and values?
It's I was going to add to the what Lora and Steve said about some of the positives. One thing is really, really neat. I mean, obviously there are people who are going to struggle remotely, but there are people. I mean, and I know with this audience, if I tell you there's been a startup manager and a steady state manager, you'll completely understand what I'm talking about. Some people love a challenge, love a thrill, love change. Other people cannot stand it. So people that may have been struggling in their role are now thriving and learning new, moving up organizations, learning new skills, adaptability, all that kind of stuff. So we joke in our business that the question changes from time to time, but the answer always is you need to do an assessment. And I think it's understanding a person's thinking style, their leadership style, their interpersonal style, and their work style, and especially work style. I mean, in terms of how much structure they need and all of that. So it's, yeah, we have a very good idea of who is going to thrive. If we have data on that person, we can get feedback from managers, the 360s, that sort of thing. But if a person does have a tendency to struggle and more likely to engage in those counterproductive work behaviors, then we need to provide that person more structure, direction, guidance, handrails, and provide coaching and development so they can grow and develop in those areas.
Now, we did talk a lot about retainment here. The question would be, how things have changed in recruitment. I mean, I'm sure MSA is hiring people every day. Giant Eagle is hiring people every day. But very often now it's a remote interview and a remote assessment. How has that changed, particularly as you're trying to find the right people, the best people for the roles?
Was that question to me?
Oh, I'll start with Steve, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. There were really two things, and I'll kind of morph into one of those, Ron. That's a really good question. Another one that's been interesting is employee development. But I'll start maybe a little bit on the hiring. So with the hiring, as we all know, you typically like to get face to face with a potential candidate, spend time with them, hopefully build some relationships and see what the fit really is. And that's not the same when you're doing it remotely. But we've really seen and so far been very, very pleased with the results of associates we've hired by really doing a lot more video work. We've really ensured, and we probably have more people doing interviews than we did. So if we had a group of 4 that may interface with a candidate, we've done more of that interface virtually now so that we get more people that have an opportunity to catch up with that candidate. And then we give that candidate the opportunity to ask a little bit more on the question side. We have not, I still would like to get them to have an opportunity to see, the building, the infrastructure, the areas where they would work longer term. But so far I think the biggest change for us is it's certainly gone virtual, and we've leaned in with more associates. And Laura, maybe you can jump in on this, but I'd love to talk development, Ron, if you think that makes sense after Laura answered that.
Yeah.
Sure. Similar, Giant Eagle definitely went to video interviews, which worked out really well. Actually, we found that we could get more interviews in. If you schedule a time and you're not escorting people around, and that seemed to go fairly well. It also really opened up where we could source talent from. And I say that something like a call center, being able, if you could do the work remote, that means you could hire someone from anywhere. And so that really sort of helped broaden it, and from that standpoint made it a little bit easier to recruit for some positions. In our retail stores, you got to be there. So that didn't help necessarily there, but definitely the ability to do video interviews helped us move things along.
Steve, you want to say something, or Al, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I think it's even more important with the remote hiring. I love the idea of getting more people involved in the interviews and getting more sets of eyes on a person, but you just try to find those predictors of past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. Find those predictors of when people, or examples of when people have worked independently, worked without supervision. And also, I always encourage my clients, check the digital footprint. Just see, a person may come in and talk about how responsible they are in the interview, and you may see a totally different story on Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever that might be. Word to the wise.
Yeah, that's a good point, Al. Ron, on the development side, the reason I brought that up is some may have had similar challenges to us. The first couple of months when we started this remote, we had a lot of development opportunities and activities that were really group settings, and where there was interaction and associates were able to get together face to face. that were, that were paused for a short period of time before we knew this thing was going to go on as long as it has. But what we tried to do after, like I said, after a couple months, we really reevaluated and said, hey, we've got to get back to some normalcy here. Number one. Number two, if continue, and we do, I certainly think, and I think, Al, you alluded to this earlier, that the development of talent is one of the key aspects of our roles as a leader, then we've got to focus on this development. So what we've really seen as very successful is we re-engage these teams again virtually, but and I think this is where you were going more with the fact that you can get time because it's, you don't have these schedules that you have people coming in and out. We found we got leadership's time in these review associates much more effectively than in the past because of the remote working. So we get a half hour or an hour and associates on how they're developing or how the workshop went and next steps they were taking to make sure they're able to achieve what they needed to for their success. And that was really refreshing to see. And I think it's something that as we go forward will be a key aspect of how we continue to develop talent into the future.
I'm going to, we're coming closer to the end here, so I'm going to save the hardest question for last. This is, so we've talked about, this is really all about people. It's all about leadership, all about communication. But how do you measure it? How do we come out of this and measure or assess our corporate culture to determine whether or not we are more than we were when we went into the pandemic, or are we less? And I'd be curious to see what your organizations are doing, and also hear from Al as to what some of the tools are out there to be able to help to assess that. Laura, I'll start with you on this one. How's that?
Okay, sounds good. I would say that there's a number of things, as with anything, to find out, you have to figure out how you're going to measure it, right? So there's great tools out there to help with that. There's, surveys, 360s, make sure that how you are looking at your performance review criteria and what it is that you want to measure, and that you're measuring the right things. And so all of that needs to be reviewed and modified as appropriate to fit the business. And probably, you're going to have to continue to look at it because this is really new to a lot of us. There are some getting feedback in a number of different ways also will help you, whether it's you put up sort of a virtual sort of, ask the CEO. You can, set up somewhere where people can ask questions anonymously, or to put out there for people to say, tell us how we're living our core values, right? Are we living up to what we say we're doing? And really get that constant feedback will give you a good, pretty good window onto, are you at least headed in the right direction? So I think those things would really help.
Thanks. Steve.
Ron, I would think first, and I agree with what Laura said, but I would think first and foremost, we continue to measure our results. We're going to measure our results to see if when we believe that this culture is effective, or that we've been able to have people work remotely as well as on site, are we still achieving the results we need to, and our projects and programs continuing to be executed in a timely manner? That's first and foremost an area that we focused on and made sure that we continue to get those results. I do think the survey piece is another checkpoint that enables you to kind of get an outside perspective. We were really pleased in the spring of last year, even in the midst of the pandemic, we did the Post-Gazette survey and we won top workplace. We were awarded that because of the associates' viewpoints, which we felt really, really fortunate to have. And now a year into this, we're embarking on our global engagement survey. So we're going to continue to do that. I think that regular cadence enables an organization to really stay close to the pulse of how the associates feel, and an opportunity to hold yourself accountable to what you say you're going to work on. But that, coupled with results, organizational results, we feel is most important.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely a best practice. Most organizations will do an organizational survey every 2 to 3 years, establish a baseline, feedback the information, and get feedback. Now, we could be in a situation where it's hard to compare apples to apples before the pandemic and surveys now, or you may have never done a survey, but it's so important to gather that baseline data in 2021 so you can then, and maybe you want to look at things more quickly. There could be a smaller population survey 6 months from now, or maybe you do it annually for a while as things continue to change. But I think it's looking at those key areas, the ones that Steve and Laura mentioned, and making sure that even if the employees don't like the answers, top leadership and individual leadership are communicating the reasons behind those decisions. People feel like they've been heard, and that helps with buy-in and commitment and engagement and building culture you want.
Great, thanks. One final question. Maybe you can, both Laura and Steve, you can provide a couple of tips on starting with Laura, on things leaders can do to continue to build on the culture, just as a final wrap up here.
Sure. A couple of things that I had often talked to the leaders to keep in mind is flexibility, right? Making sure that they understand when are the best times to have team meetings, given everything else that's going on, and whether someone's trying to homeschool or they don't have good access to daycare, those sorts of things, to be able to work around it and make sure that you're including the whole team. The other is, this is going to sound potentially kind of silly, but making sure that you schedule or block out no meeting times. So what was happening in the beginning is this constant, Teams or Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting that people literally said, I don't have time to go use the restroom. So you say, how could that be? But if you were in meetings in a physical location, you would just get up and leave briefly. But people didn't feel like they could do that. So, for your team, make sure that there's sort of blocked out time where they can actually get something to eat and not have to worry about being on camera, things like that. And the other is to find time for something like a virtual happy hour or get together of some sort. It really, be able to set up a meeting with your team, and it's optional, obviously, anyone who wants to come, gives people the ability to interact and not necessarily be just task focused for work. And it goes a long way in developing that teamwork when you're not actually physically in the same location. And also to do things like open office hours, right? Where lots of people thought about it, like they had, open, if the door was open, you could come in and talk to the leader, right? That was an indication that you could come in anytime. You don't have that. So to be able to set up times where if individuals on your team have a question, they just need to, 2 minutes of your time, they could join the meeting, ask the question, and depart. And so that in some areas, I know that's worked well. In others, not so well, because they felt like everyone had to be there. And so you have to be clear and communicating what the intent is. But those are some things that can really help your team in a remote environment.
Thanks, Laura.
So you have Laura, you just hit all these good ones. Those were really good. I have to agree with every one of them. The human rights breaks certainly were critically important and not recognized, I think, for a couple months into the pandemic by many. But the check-ins, one of the things that I would suggest that, sometimes we feel like we have to have an hour with each individual or a half hour with each individual. And there's a great opportunity to, there's a term called a huddle. So you can daily or a weekly huddle and limit it to 15 minutes. And you don't have to go through all of the data points. You just give your team the opportunity to ask for help or get clarifying questions or answers from the leader. So there's an opportunity I would recommend that folks consider as a way to check in and just stay current with what's going on and be respectful, as Laura said, with schedules. I think the flexibility piece is super critical. The other thing, if you are a leader of leaders, it's a great opportunity to do skip levels and to really, with your team schedule and create some kind of activity where you spend some time a couple levels down in the organization and just ask them, how are they doing? What do they need help with? Show your appreciation, as we've said in the past, for the work that they've done and the way that they've engaged in a different world than we had before. But you can learn so much when you take that next level and you give them an opportunity to reach out directly to you. And you know, the only thing I would tell you, it's super important you make this, you know, a process that's not retaliatory. You know, you got to make sure that there's open dialogue and there's the opportunity for that to be seen as a learning activity. But it's really, I think you could find it very rewarding for you and your organization if you did that, along with the things that Laura and I talked about. Laura had some really good ones at the front of this.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, just a few takeaways here as we begin to wrap up. Number one is corporate culture. Investing in corporate culture is more important than ever. Many of the tools that we used prior to the pandemic are still incredibly relevant. You know, Steve, you talked about you know, the engagement surveys and you know, tools like that that help to measure where your corporate culture is going. Laura, you talked about the need for communication, both informal and formal communication, how key that is to communicating the corporate culture. And then going back to both of your comments is, you know, be respectful. We're all going through this for the first time in our lives, and everybody reacts to these things a little bit differently. So be respectful. It may not be what you first think it is, but it's but really good input here. I want to thank Al, Laura, and Steve for your insights. This is a very timely subject, and your real world experience, I'm sure, will be valuable to our audience even after the pandemic subsides. We are surely closer to the end of this than the beginning of it now, and that's encouraging. I want to thank our sponsors again. It's their support that allows us to provide such timely presentations as we've seen today. And thanks to the audience for your questions and for attending today. A survey link will be emailed to you following this program. Your feedback is greatly appreciated to help us with future programs. The next ACG Pittsburgh chapter virtual program is our annual M&A panel to be held on March 30th from 11:45 to 1 p.m. Surely a program that you don't want to miss. We hope to see you there. Please watch your email for further information, and have a wonderful rest of your day, and stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.